You know what hurts more than being broken? Realizing you stayed broken just to keep someone else whole. Let that sink in for a second, because someone listening right now has been the healer in a room full of people who only knew how to hurt. Someone listening right now gave away so much of themselves just to watch someone else walk away without a backward glance. And yet, here you are, still standing. No more tears, no more begging for love, no more wondering what you did wrong. This is not the story of her crying in the dark anymore. This is the story of her glow up, her rebirth, her rise from the ashes they thought would bury her. She's not crying anymore. She's glowing. She didn't arrive at her strength overnight. There wasn't a sudden glow that lit up her life like a movie scene. No music swelled, no applause echoed through her living room. She woke up with swollen eyes and a numb heart, staring at the same ceiling she'd cried herself to sleep under. And yet, something had shifted. Something so small, it was almost unnoticeable, like the first spark in a long dead fire. It wasn't confidence or clarity, it was just exhaustion. Not the kind that makes you sleep for hours, but the kind that makes you finally stop trying to hold everything together for people who wouldn't lift a finger for you, who wouldn't lift a finger for you. She had spent so long bending, breaking, and betraying herself to be loved. She poured herself into conversations where she was only half heard, showed up for people who left her waiting in every possible way, and held space for someone who never truly held her. And for what? To feel chosen? To feel like she mattered? That illusion finally shattered. She looked at herself in the mirror one morning and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were tired. Her smile was gone. She wasn't living. She was surviving on autopilot, functioning in a world that had convinced her that her softness made her weak. But that morning, something inside whispered no more. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet decision, a silent vow to herself that she would stop watering gardens that only grew thorns. She realized that being broken wasn't her fault, but staying broken, that was something she had the power to change. No one was going to rescue her. No one was going to suddenly wake up and appreciate all that she gave. And once she accepted that, the tears began to dry. Not because it didn't hurt anymore, but because the pain had taught her what pleading never could. She was never meant to be an option. She had always been the prize, the light, the blessing. She had just been handing herself over to people who didn't even know how to hold something sacred. So she stood up, not with strength, but with resolve. Her hands shook, her voice trembled, but she stood. That was the beginning of her healing. Because there's a moment when you've cried the same tears for the 100th time, replayed the same memories until they become nightmares, and asked God the same question over and over: why wasn't I enough? But that question loses power when you start asking a better one. Why did I think I had to be less for them to stay? That question unraveled everything. It took her back to moments in her past when she first learned to associate love with pain, affection with performance, and acceptance with silence. She remembered the younger version of herself who tolerated being ignored just to be near someone, who clung to hope like a lifeline, believing that if she just loved harder, tried more, cried less, she could fix what was never hers to heal. And for the first time, she stopped blaming them and started forgiving herself. Forgiving herself for not knowing better, for thinking that loyalty meant suffering, for staying when everything in her spirit told her to leave. Healing didn't start with revenge or detachment. It started with honesty. She admitted she was tired of hurting. She admitted that pretending to be okay was destroying her. And in that raw, exposed moment, something changed. She didn't need to be strong. She just needed to be real. The real her, flawed, emotional, loyal to a fault, was worth loving. But she realized that love had to come from within first. That's when she began to glow. Not because someone finally saw her worth, but because she stopped giving it away to people who never earned it. She no longer dressed up her sadness to appear strong. She sat in it, cried through it, faced it, and it didn't kill her. In fact, it woke her up. Pain is strange that way. It either destroys you or transforms you. And she chose transformation. She stopped chasing closure from people who were never honest, stopped waiting for apologies that would never come. She didn't need them to fix it. She needed to stop bleeding from the wounds they left and start stitching herself back together. Each day was still a fight. Some mornings, the weight of memory crushed her lungs. Some nights, the silence screamed louder than any goodbye. But she didn't give up. She turned the pain into purpose. She wrote, she prayed, she worked on herself. Not for revenge, not for validation, but because she owed it to the girl inside her who had been overlooked and overextended for far too long. What they thought would break her ended up awakening her. The woman who once begged for crumbs now dines with dignity. The one who once questioned her value now protects her peace like her life depends on it. Because it does. There's no switch to healing, no magic moment where the pain vanishes. But she discovered that every time she chose herself, even when it hurt, she was reclaiming the pieces of herself she had once given away for free. She didn't rise with perfection. She rose with scars, with lessons, with boundaries. And that's what made her glow. Not the absence of struggle, but the presence of victory in the face of it. The glow didn't come from being untouched. It came from being broken, surviving it, and never allowing that brokenness to define her again. She used to raise her voice in rooms where her heart was already being ignored. She used to try and explain herself over and over, repeating her worth like a broken record in the hope that someone would finally hear it. But no matter how loud she got, it always seemed to fall on deaf ears. Her emotions were dismissed. Her questions were deflected. Her concerns were labeled too much or too sensitive. And so she tried harder, speaking softer, then louder, then quieter again. She tried to shape her words into something less threatening, more palatable, more agreeable. But no matter what she said, she felt like her voice didn't matter. That's when it hit her. Maybe it wasn't the way she was saying it. Maybe she was simply speaking to people who had already decided not to listen. That realization came like a slow ache, not a sudden blow. One day, she sat in the middle of an argument that sounded exactly like the last 10 arguments, and she went quiet. Not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she finally realized saying it wouldn't change a thing. And that silence, it felt strange at first. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't defeat. It was clarity. It was the moment she stopped trying to convince people of things they were never going to understand. It was the moment she stopped trying to win battles in relationships where there were no allies, just opponents in disguise. At first, she missed the sound of her own defense. She missed trying to make people see what they were doing. But then she noticed something. In the silence, she had more peace. In the stillness, she could finally hear herself. Not the loud voice of hurt screaming to be heard, but the deeper voice beneath it, the one whispering truth. And that truth was this: when you have to beg someone to treat you right, it was never love to begin with. When you have to argue for basic respect, you're not in a relationship, you're in a power struggle. There was a time when she measured her worth by how much she could endure, the pain she could carry, the disrespect she could tolerate, the loneliness she could swallow without complaint. It all became a twisted form of validation. She thought if she could just hold on long enough, love would show up. If she could just endure the storm, someone would notice the strength it took to stand in the rain. But that strength, that endurance, it didn't earn her love. It earned her silence. It earned her more pain. Because people don't value what you suffer silently. They grow comfortable with it. They begin to expect it. And she realized too late that suffering quietly wasn't a sign of love. It was a signal that she had forgotten her own. It took her too long to see that love isn't proven by how much you can tolerate. Real love doesn't watch you break and call it beautiful. It doesn't ask you to shrink or sacrifice just to keep it alive. And she had been doing just that. Shrinking, bending, breaking, all in the name of love. But it wasn't love. It was control dressed up as care. It was manipulation masked as passion. And for too long, she had confused attention with affection, possession with protection. The kind of love she needed wasn't found in pain. It was waiting on the other side of her healing. So she started walking away, not from people, but from patterns. The pattern of believing she had to prove she was worthy. The pattern of believing that being needed was the same as being valued. The pattern of being the one who always stayed, even when her heart was in pieces. She stopped seeking approval in the form of apologies. She stopped mistaking struggle for commitment. Because real love doesn't make you question your sanity. It doesn't make you feel like you're too much for wanting to be seen, heard, and respected. It meets you where you are and grows with you, not against you. At first, it was lonely. She missed the comfort of chaos. That's the thing about unhealthy love. It's loud, it's consuming, and it keeps you distracted from the emptiness inside. But once she stepped away, the silence revealed everything. She started to hear the voice she had long ignored, her own, the voice that whispered truth when lies had been screaming over it. The voice that said, you don't have to suffer to be loved. You don't have to bleed to be chosen. That voice grew louder, steadier, more certain each day. And as she listened, she began to heal. She stopped chasing. She stopped begging. She stopped tolerating. Not because she didn't care, but because she finally cared enough about herself to walk away from anything that made her question her value. She chose solitude over suffering. She chose growth over comfort. She chose to rebuild her life with boundaries instead of battles. That's when the glow began. Slowly, silently, like the sun rising after a long, brutal night. Not everyone noticed. Not everyone clapped. But she did. She looked in the mirror and saw someone brave. Someone who finally stopped asking, what's wrong with me? And started declaring, there's nothing wrong with me. She replaced pain with peace, replaced drama with direction. She didn't need to scream anymore to feel seen. She saw herself. And that changed everything. Because once you start loving yourself deeply, you become a mirror. And people who truly love you will reflect that love right back. But those who only fed off your pain will fall away. She didn't chase them. She blessed their absence. Because her healing didn't require permission. It required courage. And every day she woke up and made the brave choice to choose herself again. There's nothing louder than a woman who knows her worth. Nothing more radiant than the one who rises. Not from validation, but from vision. She's not bitter. She's not broken. She's not crying anymore. She's glowing because she finally realized that her strength was never in how long she could endure. It was in how quickly she could reclaim her peace. And she's walking in that now, steady, whole, unapologetically free. She used to crave their approval like it was oxygen. Every decision, every word, every step she took was filtered through the question, will this make them love me more? She shrank herself to fit inside their comfort. She toned down her brilliance so they wouldn't feel insecure. She softened her voice so they wouldn't label her too intense. And too much makes you way down under its weight. She apologized for emotions that were perfectly human. But none of it worked. Not really. Because the more she compromised herself, the more they took. And the less she felt like she existed. And that's when it hit her. No amount of losing herself would ever make the wrong people stay. There's a danger in making your worth dependent on the opinions of people who only see fragments of who you are. She didn't realize it then, but she was handing them the pen and asking them to write her story. And of course, they wrote it small. They wrote her quiet. They wrote her in a way that made them feel big, not in a way that reflected her truth. And she believed them, believed that she needed fixing, believed that if she just became a little easier to love, they'd finally treat her right. But bending yourself into a shape someone else prefers doesn't guarantee you a place in their heart. It just guarantees you'll lose sight of your own. It wasn't one moment that changed her. It was a slow unraveling, a long process of realizing that she had built her identity on sand, on the ever-shifting approval of people who didn't even know how to love themselves, let alone love her. She remembered standing in a room full of people, smiling, laughing, giving them what they wanted to see, and still feeling utterly alone. That's when she realized attention isn't affection, and being wanted isn't the same as being valued. People can enjoy your presence and still not respect your essence. So she started peeling it all back. The masks, the performances, the people-pleasing. At first, it felt like standing naked in front of a crowd. She didn't know who she was without their validation. But the more she stood in that vulnerability, the more she saw her own reflection clearly. She wasn't too much. She was in the wrong environment. She wasn't hard to love. She was just offering herself to people who only knew how to take. That's when she made the decision to stop explaining herself, to stop proving her worth, to stop auditioning for roles in people's lives where the script was already written without her in mind. And something incredible happened. She began to glow. Not because life got easier, but because she finally stopped trying to be what she wasn't. She stopped molding herself into their image and started shaping her world around her truth. She began to walk into rooms with her head held high, knowing that her presence was enough. She didn't need to be liked to be worthy. She didn't need to be chosen to be valuable. She was already whole, already radiant, and nothing they could say or do could take that away. She stopped apologizing for her standards, stopped second-guessing her intuition, stopped lowering her vibration to make others feel more comfortable in their dysfunction. And in doing so, she created a new space, a space where peace could breathe, where joy could stretch its limbs, where her spirit could grow without limits. She surrounded herself with people who didn't just tolerate her light, but celebrated it, who didn't need her to shrink so they could shine, who didn't confuse vulnerability with weakness, but honored it as the mark of someone who had lived deeply. It was no longer about being accepted, it was about being aligned. She realized that the right people don't need you to perform. They just need you to be present. They don't ask you to change, they grow alongside you. And the wrong people, she let them go. Not with bitterness, not with revenge, but with gratitude. Because every time they tried to dim her, they pointed her back to her own light. Every rejection was redirection. Every betrayal was a blessing in disguise. She's not crying anymore. Not because she never hurts, but because her tears no longer fall for people who never deserved them. Her heart still feels, but now it feels without losing itself. She's glowing not because life is perfect, but because she finally realized she doesn't have to be. She can shine with scars. She can smile with history. She can rise, not in spite of her past, but because of it. And when you meet her now, you'll see it. Not just in her eyes, but in her silence, in her confidence, in the way she walks like someone who no longer seeks permission to exist. She's home now in herself. And that's the most powerful glow there is. There was a time when silence was her prison, when the things she didn't say screamed louder than the ones she did. when her smile was a mask so heavy it left invisible bruises. She used to sit in a room full of people and feel like she was drowning in her own thoughts. Thoughts she couldn't share, fears she couldn't voice, pain she couldn't explain. Not because she didn't want to, but because she had learned that being vulnerable was dangerous. She had tried before, opened up just a little, exposed a piece of her soul, and got met with judgment, indifference, or worse, betrayal. So she learned to stay quiet, to keep the ache behind her eyes, to nod when she wanted to scream, to laugh when she wanted to cry. But pain that is buried alive doesn't die. It grows. It builds walls around the heart. It distorts the truth. It convinces you that you're alone, unworthy, and too broken to be understood. And she believed it. She thought no one could handle the full weight of her story, so she carried it alone. Night after night, pretending she was okay while her soul begged for release. But that pretending, that silence, it was killing her spirit. It was draining her glow. Because you can't heal what you refuse to feel, and you can't move forward while dragging the baggage you won't even admit exists. Then one night she broke. Quietly, away from everyone, she shattered. The tears she had held back for years poured out of her like a flood. And in that flood, something washed away. The belief that she had to be strong all the time. That night, she finally gave herself permission to feel without apology. And it was in that moment of absolute surrender that the first crack of light broke through, not from outside, but from within. Because the real glow doesn't come when everything is perfect. It comes when you let go of the performance and embrace the truth. She began to speak. Slowly at first, she whispered her truth to herself in the dark, unsure if it even made sense, unsure if she'd be judged for the thoughts that had haunted her. But with each word she dared to say, she chipped away at the silence that had suffocated her. She began to journal, to pray, to breathe, not for anyone else, but for herself. And as she gave voice to her wounds, they began to lose their power. She realized that speaking wasn't weakness, it was warfare. Her voice became her weapon, not a weapon to harm, but a weapon to reclaim what she had lost. Her identity, her confidence, her peace. She didn't need a crowd to validate her healing. She didn't need applause to confirm her progress. This was sacred work, done in sacred places. And the more she honored that space, the more her glow returned. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that commands respect. The kind that says, I've been through fire, but I'm not burnt. I've been in the dark, but I am not destroyed. She began to walk differently, not faster, not louder, but with presence, with purpose, with a quiet power that couldn't be faked or forced. Because now, her strength wasn't in how silent she could be, it was in how honest she had become. And those around her, some didn't understand. Some preferred the version of her that stayed small, stayed agreeable, stayed quiet. But she didn't owe them that, not anymore. She wasn't shrinking for their comfort anymore. She wasn't sacrificing her voice to maintain a peace that wasn't real. She had found something deeper, real peace, the kind that can't be taken away because it was never dependent on someone else's approval. It was born in truth, forged in vulnerability, anchored in authenticity. She's not crying anymore, not because she doesn't feel, but because she's finally free to express what she does feel. She's glowing, not because she's untouched by pain, but because she no longer hides from it. Her glow is rooted in freedom. The freedom to be fully herself, to speak when she needs to rest when she must, to rise, not for applause, but because standing tall is her birthright. And that glow, it doesn't fade when life gets hard. It shines brighter, because now she knows the truth. Her voice was never too much. It was just waiting for her permission to be heard. She used to beg for clarity, as if the truth from someone else could complete the puzzle inside her. She replayed conversations like a broken record, searching for hidden meanings in their silence, trying to understand how love could vanish without explanation. She thought closure was something they had to give her, something that required an apology, an admission, or, at the very least, but the truth she eventually discovered hit harder than any lie ever could. Some people will never give you closure because it costs them nothing to walk away, while it costs you everything to keep waiting for answers that will never come. At first, it felt like madness, waking up every day with questions but no resolution. She tried to make peace with what she didn't understand, but her mind kept chasing meaning. What did she do wrong? Was she not enough? Could she have done more? She thought closure was something tied to justice, like if she could just confront them, force them to see the damage they'd done, then maybe she could finally breathe again. But days turned into months, and the silence from them turned into noise within her. That's when she realized sometimes the explanation you're waiting for isn't coming, not because you're unworthy of it, but because they're incapable of giving it. And in that realization, something shifted. She began to understand that waiting for closure from someone else is like handing them the keys to your peace. They may have left your life, but you're the one keeping the door open, hoping they'll come back and fix the mess they made. But they won't. Some people don't come to make things right. They leave because they can't face their own reflection in your hurt. And she had to stop expecting healing from the same place that wounded her. She had to stop circling the rooms hoping for an apology that might never come. So she made the boldest move she ever could. She gave herself closure. She sat with her pain and listened to it without judgment. She let herself grieve, not just the person, but the version of herself who believed she needed them to be whole. She acknowledged the lies she had believed, the story she had told herself to justify their absence, and she ripped the bandage off her heart, not to bleed again, but to finally breathe. That's when the healing began, not in a loud cinematic moment, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of reclaiming her own narrative. She began to speak her truth, not to them, but to herself. She forgave them, not because they asked, but because she refused to be chained to bitterness. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, it meant releasing. It meant saying, you don't get to control my peace anymore. You don't get to occupy space in my heart rent-free. And most of all, it meant reclaiming her power. Because true closure doesn't come from their confession. It comes when you decide that their silence no longer defines your story. That's when the glow returned, not as a flash, but as a steady burn. She no longer needed answers to feel free. She didn't need to make sense of what was senseless. She found peace in the present, in the fact that she was still standing, still breathing, still becoming. She was no longer the girl who waited for someone to explain why they left. She was the woman who chose herself and moved forward. She started building again, brick by brick, belief by belief. She created joy without permission, beauty without validation, and love without condition. And in doing so, she became radiant. The kind of glow that can't be dimmed by the shadows of the past. The kind of glow that comes from knowing you don't need someone else's closure to begin your healing. The kind of glow that makes people wonder what changed, because they remember the girl who cried herself to sleep, but now she walks like a storm passed through her and left strength in its wake. She's not crying anymore, not because she didn't lose something, but because she realized she gained something greater, herself. She's glowing now, not because life suddenly made sense, but because she stopped looking for clarity in someone else's chaos. She wrote her own ending. And that's the most powerful kind of closure there is. She's not crying anymore because she has cried enough to fill oceans, enough tears to drown in, enough pain to break her, but she refused to stay broken. She refused to let those tears define the rest of her life. She went through the darkest nights without answers, without a hand to hold, and still she rose. Not perfectly, not without stumbling, but with quiet determination that said, this pain will not have the final word. She cried through betrayal, through the moments when someone she trusted used her love like a weapon. She cried through silence, when no explanation came, when all she had were memories and unanswered questions. She cried in loneliness, when no one noticed that her smile was a disguise and her strength was survival. She cried for the version of herself who believed she wasn't enough. And then she stopped. Not because the pain vanished overnight, but because she was tired of handing it the pen to write her story. She's not crying anymore because she stopped waiting for them to come back, waiting for someone to say I'm sorry, waiting for the closure that never came. She realized that no one could give her peace except her, that waiting for someone else to heal her wounds was like waiting for the rain in a drought. They might never show up, and she would keep dying a little more each day. So she stopped waiting and started walking. Slowly, bravely, fiercely, she walked through healing like a battlefield, shedding old beliefs, breaking toxic cycles, learning to breathe again without bitterness. She's glowing now, but it's not the kind of glow you get from validation. It's not makeup deep or smile thin. It's the kind of glow that comes from becoming. From unbecoming what she was never meant to be and stepping into who she truly is. She glows because she is whole, even in her scars, even in her silence, even in her softness. She learned that her sensitivity was not a flaw, it was a superpower, that her tears were not weakness. They were the evidence of her capacity to love, to feel, to care. She owns her emotions now. She speaks her truth, not to be understood, but because her truth deserves to breathe. She walks in rooms, no longer trying to prove anything. Her presence is the proof. She's glowing because she gave herself closure, not the kind where someone comes and makes things right, but the kind where she looked in the mirror and said, I'm done bleeding for people who never had the courage to love me right. She rewrote the ending they left blank. She turned the pain into poetry. She transformed the heartbreak into holy ground because she understood that not everyone who breaks you is evil. Some are just broken themselves, but it's not her job to fix them. It's her job to heal herself. She's glowing because she set boundaries, because she finally said no without guilt and yes without fear. She stopped giving chances to people who only came around to drain her. She stopped justifying disrespect. She raised her standards, not out of pride, but out of self-respect. And when the wrong people left, she made room for peace to enter, room for joy to breathe, room for purpose to take root. She's glowing because she rediscovered her worth, not in someone's arms, not in someone's approval, but in the quiet places, in the moments she chose herself, in the days she got up and kept going when she didn't feel like it, in the prayers she whispered through the pain, in the dreams she protected through the disappointments. She realized she wasn't broken, she was becoming, and that revelation changed everything. Now her laughter is real, her steps are grounded, her energy is sacred. She walks in grace, not because life is easy, but because she's not afraid to face the hard things anymore. She's not perfect. She still has scars, but she wears them like medals. She knows they don't disqualify her, they crown her. Because she didn't just survive, she transformed. And now, the same world that once watched her break, watches her rise, watch her shine. Watch her carry light into every room she enters. Not because she needs to be seen, but because she finally sees herself. She's not crying anymore, she's glowing. Now, I want to ask you something real. Which part of her journey do you see yourself in? Are you still waiting for closure, or are you ready to give it to yourself? Are you still hiding your glow, or are you ready to own it? Tell me in the comments what you've learned from this message, and if there's a chapter you want to dive deeper into. If there's a part of your story you're still fighting to understand, let me know. I'll create a video based on your need, your voice, your growth. Because this isn't just about her story, it's about yours.